My name's Isamaya and we are at my house in London. My name's Isamaya Ffrench. I'm a makeup artist and creative director, and I'm the founder of the makeup brand Isamaya, and I'm also a collector of heads. So this is one of my most prized objects. It's a dental phantom, and it is what the Victorians, I believe, at least up until maybe 50 to 100 years ago, people would use as dental students to work on teeth when they were learning to become a dentist. And I was actually a dental nurse. So I was doing all the really gory stuff when people have their teeth pulled out and new teeth drilled in. So I don't know, maybe that's where I got some of my obsession with gore and teeth and other things from. So this is another of my absolute favorite pieces of art that I own. It's actually Alec Weck. Alec Weck is one of the first models that I worked with. She made me realize that I could do this sort of face and body painting in a professional way. And I worked with her for ID magazine the very beginning of my career. So it's quite a little sentimental piece for me. So I grew up in a house where my parents were collectors of objects, and we had all sorts of things from wasps' nests to photographic enlargers to engine parts. And I really spent a lot of my childhood exploring that house and all the different rooms and all the kind of chaotic things that you might be able to find. I actually studied really academic subjects at school. I did maths and physics, and I kind of didn't really know what I was doing and why I was doing it. So when I moved to London, I went to Central St Martin's to study product design. It's kind of where, I suppose, science meets objects. And within a few years, I realized that that was actually too limiting, and I wanted to do something more creative and more abstract. So I quit my course and I joined a theatre company and learned how to face and body paint, because I loved art and I'd always been very artistic growing up. And really, the mix of the two, the body painting and the theatre group, led me into makeup artistry. I think because I didn't have any formal training as a makeup artist and I had this experience in the kind of 3D world of product design, I really loved working with my hands and making things and casting things. And I spent a lot of time at university in the metal and wood workshops learning how to solder and learning how to carve wood. So I really got comfortable working with my hands, and I think when I approach makeup, it has that same three-dimensional quality to it. You know, I love prosthetics because it's really about building something onto the skin, creating new characters, and I suppose working in a bit of a designy sense as opposed to in a flat way with just makeup. When I finally got into makeup, I was really supported by some amazing people in the industry like Mert and Marcus. I worked with them for many years, and actually working with photographers like Mert and Marcus and like Klein, I really learned a huge amount about lighting, about beauty, about retouching, and it was such an informative part of my career, those early years working with, some of the greats out there. And I think that's really helped to shape and define how I look at beauty, as well as having my own kind of weird version of what beauty is. There have been some real defining moments in my makeup career, and one of them was working for Tom Ford. And I must have been in my early 20s, and I joined his team to develop a new line of cosmetics. It was the Extreme collection, so it was like really exciting, powerful, punchy colors and new eyeshadows and vibrant iridescent lip glosses. And I think that was particularly exciting and special for me because, it's Tom Ford, and it was a real honor to be working with him. I launched Dazed Beauty in 2018, and for me, that was a really important step in my career because it helped to shape the way that I like to make beauty images. I love modern, futuristic, forward-thinking, progressive image making. And so Dazed Beauty allowed me to collaborate with people that work outside of classical beauty. So I worked with people in the 3D field, I worked with animators, I worked with machine learning software, and it was a really exciting period for beauty because it was kind of just before AI took off. And I think it really kind of springboarded my aesthetic and my approach to digital beauty making images. So over Frieze Week in London, I exhibited some work with the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and I held a dinner with Bistro Tech. And the work was in collaboration with a magazine, an editorial magazine. Well, I'd interviewed Brandon Cronenberg. He's one of my favourite film directors. And it was a really special project because the work came from a really deep conversation about the kind of boundaries between obscurity, the grotesque, and beauty. And I feel like that's something that I explore a lot in my work anyway. You know, I feel like beauty has limits, it has limitations, whereas everything else, the sort of unusual or the sublime or the grotesque, you can really, really go deep, sort of endlessly. And I like the idea of creating images where there's that sort of tension between something that's a bit uncomfortable, but also incredibly sort of desirable as well. So it was an amazing experience to have, you know, my work blown up really big in the Institute of Contemporary Arts. And Bistro Tech is a collaborator of mine. We've put on dinners in the past where we create edible cosmetics. So the dinner is, you know, you sit down and you have a big pot of cream that you ingest, and you have, you know, lipsticks that you can eat and that kind of thing. So they really are my perfect kind of culinary collaborator. So I've worked in fashion and fashion shows for, you know, about 15 years now. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is how much of a managerial role you have to take on when you're managing a team of, say, 60 makeup artists. And I didn't realize myself. But, you know, it's really important when you work with a team to be able to be flexible enough and give your team enough freedom to try and execute the look and support them at the same time. You know, it's very difficult to create and reproduce makeup work if you're anxious. So it's really important for me and my core team to make sure that everybody else, you know, and across my show team is comfortable and happy and having a good time and feels like they can ask my opinion. It's a really supportive environment, and I think that's really how you make the best work. The hardest part is probably getting 9 bags up the escalator on the Eurostar, and that will never get easier. When I started the Isamaya beauty brand, it was really important for me to be authentic, but also to challenge people's ideas of what a beauty brand could be. And a lot of people have felt like it was subversive because some of the themes I used were things like BDSM or a phallic-shaped lipstick that I launched last year. But actually what it was about was having a conversation with the consumer, with my audience, and asking them if beauty does have limitations. And I think what was really important for me is to allow people to use their imagination when they look at things. Because if you're in an office working 9 to 5 and you're looking at a lipstick in the shape of a penis, it might ask you to question everything else around you, because if that can be that, then maybe I can be something else. And what my beauty brand is about fundamentally is challenging perceptions of what society encourages us to think about beauty and what it can be, and about pushing those boundaries, furthering those conversations, and really turning beauty into something else and something more exciting. I feel extremely fortunate that I've had the opportunity to work with the most amazing people really in the world, you know, the most incredible performers and talent. Cher, Madonna, Rihanna, Arena Shake. Working with talent of that caliber who know themselves so well, their own craft, they're confident, really helps educate me in how to do a better job as not just a makeup artist, but just as a professional. I think as the world of social media has developed, there is an expectation on everybody to be a talent and to perform or present. And I can imagine that it's quite a complicated relationship that a lot of creatives have when you have this amazing creative impetus, but you don't necessarily want to do or be that person on screen. And I do feel that there's an element of expectation now for the majority of people in any industry to kind of find their performative side and kind of have that persona on social media. It can be challenging, but it can also be really rewarding. And actually, I think if you push yourself, you can only really learn from these things and sort of expand as a person. I think the world of AI is really just beginning. And, you know, I use it in so many areas of my life, from, you know, fixing things in Photoshop, removing backgrounds, adding eye makeup. And it's one of those things that if you're willing to use it as a tool and see it as an extension of your work and your craft, and I suppose, yes, as an additional tool to your artistry palette, it's a really, really good thing. I haven't yet experienced the dark side of AI, and it might be coming, but I think what it is doing is helping people express themselves and explore new ways of image making in a way that we haven't been able to do before. And I do think that's really exciting. You know, if you have all of these incredible inputs and stimuli and you yourself don't know how to express them with pen or paper, having software or having something that can help you do that, it's actually quite a magical thing. Body modification has been around probably since the dawn of man, and I feel like we go through ebbs and flows as a society of embracing it and then rejecting it. You know, we push things too far and then we have to pull it back again. And I think it'll probably always be something that's part and parcel of being a human and how you identify yourself. It helps you identify your social groups, your cultural groups, and for a lot of people, it's a really important part of their identity. I say that every culture probably has some kind of identity marker that is man-made, that helps them connect to their environment, to their community, their society. And I think that's probably something quite innate in us, that doing things to ourselves, whether that's through accessorizing or clothes choices or body modification, helps you identify and express yourself. And I think that's a kind of tribalism that evolves every day. I am a bit of an advocate for adventurous beauty, extreme therapies, and I've done almost everything under the sun once. I've had, you know, my blood taken and syringed back into my face. I've had thermal neogen plasma sparked into my skin. I've had lasers, big machines, kind of you name it. I just love giving it all a go. I often get asked how I would define today's beauty standard, and it is one of the hardest questions to answer, because not only are my tastes and ideas evolving, but globally there are so many different approaches and standards to beauty. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about beauty and why I'll love it forever, because wherever you are in the world, there is so much depth and history, politics, cultural identity factors. There's just so much that goes into what shapes beauty, and it is a forever changing thing. And so I think that's why I'll always be really passionate about it, because ultimately it speaks to why we are human.